All right, guys, happy Thursday evening. Welcome. Thank you for being here on Zoom. Tonight, we are unpacking the experience of what it means to be a first, second, or third generation Latinx person living in the US. And I'm really excited to introduce you all to each other. We have Juliana Kleist-Mendez, an Iowa-born Cuban-American director finishing her MFA at the University of California, San Diego. We have Jasmine Malave, who is an actor, comedian, writer, and teaching artist. We have Woe, a musician and actor preparing to release his debut album, Woe Is Me, in April, which is very exciting. We have Erica Gertz. She is a business consultant. She's a proud new dog mom, and she's also my sister. We have Steven Santana. He's an actor, screenwriter, co-host of the Bandwagon Effect podcast. We have Vicky Oseguera. She is an artist. Christian Perry is an actor and teaching artist. We have Richard E. Calvache, aka Mr. Rich, and he is a storyteller. I pulled from a couple of Pew Research studies done in 2004 and in 2009, respectively. So breaking down what first generation, second generation, and third generation Latinx person means. So basically, for the purposes of this conversation, first generation Latinos, Latines, Pew uses Latino, so apologies for the not gender neutral term. First generations were born outside of the United States or on the island of Puerto Rico. Second generations were born in the United States to immigrant parents. Third or higher generations were born in the United States to US-born parents. So the largest differences in responses between generations, basically the biggest differential gap, exists between first and second generation Latinos, aka immigrants and their children, or between those who are foreign born and those who were born in the United States. These differences include demographic characteristics, views on identity, and attitudes towards social values, as well as personal experiences in the United States. In evaluating social values, first-generation Latinos are more likely to express views generally considered more conservative than second-generation Latinos. When asked whether they thought divorce was unacceptable, nearly half of first-generation Latinos reported that they believe it is unacceptable, compared to 3 in 10 second-generation Latinos. When asked about abortion, more than 8 in 10 first-generation Latinos say it is unacceptable, compared to about 2/3 of second-generation Latinos. Second and third generation, so kids of immigrants or further down the line, second and third generation or higher Hispanics. And okay, another thing about Pew, so scholarly article, but it's not perfect. They interchange Latino and Hispanic, which is, as if you look, you see that it's not the same thing. Hispanics typically hail from Spain or are of Spanish descent, and Latine, Latino, Latinx is Central South America, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, basically Latin America, not including Spain. In any case, second and third generation or higher Hispanics report having very similar levels of both income and education. A quarter of second generation Latinos report annual household incomes of $50,000 or more, compared to slightly more third generation or higher Latinos. I guess it's worth keeping inflation in mind, or keeping just economic recessions. If this study was done in 2009, it would be coming off of the heels of a very painful recession, and we are also in the middle of another one. At least 3 out of 4 second generation Latinos and third generation or higher Latinos report that they have at least a high school diploma or the equivalent. Second and third generation or higher Latinos differ in the language that they primarily speak and read. Less than half of second generation Latinos, compared to nearly 8 in 10 third generation or higher Latinos, are English dominant. More than twice as many second generation Latinos are bilingual compared to third generation or higher. And this is something that I've typed up. This is not directly taken from a Pew Research or anything like that, but it's something that I saw in reading articles online. There's a lot of focus in education when differentiating the generations. And a big something that felt very important to me was the differentiations between class, typically middle class, middle or upper class Latinx persons who are second generation or third generation versus working class of those same generations. Basically, middle or upper class students or kids are typically exposed to and required to act norms of independence, such as focus on individual development, personal choice, and self-expression. Meanwhile, working class students in general are typically exposed to and required to enact norms of interdependence, such as adjusting to and responding to others' needs and connecting to others. So I thought that was very interesting. So a majority of the nation's 16 million Hispanic children are now second generation, meaning that they are US-born sons or daughters of at least one foreign-born parent, typically someone who came to this country in the immigration wave from Mexico, Central America, and South America that began around 1980 and continued in the 1990s. 11% of Latinx children are first generation, meaning that they themselves are foreign-born, and 37% are third generation or higher, meaning they're US-born children of US-born parents. So some quick statistics: 43% of first generation Latinx children, 21% of those in second generation, and 5% in third generation or higher are not fluent in English. 34% of first generation Latino children live in poverty, compared with 26% of those in second generation and 24% in third generation or higher. 69% of first generation Latino children live with married couple families, compared with 73% of second generation children and only 52% in the third generation or higher. Although basic socioeconomic factors suggest that Hispanic or Latino children in the third generation or higher have a leg up on their peers, not all advantages lie with the children of parents who were born and educated in the US. Hispanic children in the third generation or higher are twice as likely as other Hispanic children to live in a female-headed household. Single mother families are more likely to live in poverty, and adolescents residing with both biological parents tend to display better educational outcomes and less risky behavior than do adolescents raised in other family arrangements. In conclusion, many important aspects of the lives of Hispanic or Latino children vary by generational status. Projections suggest that the family context of Hispanic children is changing, and that in future years, a greater share will be born into families that have been in the United States for at least a generation, and whose parents will have been born and educated in the United States. This compositional change will likely affect the educational and social outcomes of Hispanic children, perhaps for the better, perhaps not. So I read all of this and I was like, basically the breadth and scope of class, socioeconomic standing, race, I'm sure is in there as well. It really feels like it's just kind of anyone's game when you are a young or a child Latin American or Hispanic person growing up in the States. So I know I just spewed a lot of facts at you, but I'm just gonna give you 3 questions that I thought would help kick things off. How has class or social standing shaped your Latin American identity as a second or third generation Latin American person? How have you reconciled your dual or more cultures? Do you feel an element of an identity crisis, both within your upbringing and where you are now as an adult? And then the last question, which is my favorite, is what does the American dream mean to you? And you can answer all of these questions. You can answer one. These questions can make you think of something that have nothing to do with the questions. It's up to you, but I think that's where we're gonna start. So I open it up to the group.
I'll go. So part of the reason why I'm here is, I'm Vicky again. Part of the reason why I'm here is because these kind of subjects make me really uncomfortable, because I have a really hard time identifying with my cultural background. So that's why I'm here, to kind of push myself and actually do that a little bit. So my dad immigrated from Mexico when he was very young. So I'm second generation, but it almost feels like I'm third generation, since my dad did most of his growing up in the US. My dad, I guess, like, the best way to explain it is he seemed kind of ashamed of his culture and his heritage. So growing up, I was exposed to very little of what it's like to be a Latin or Latin American. And my dad never spoke Spanish in the house. I only heard Spanish when I'd go over to my grandma's house. That's where I'd get like keywords and things like that. Or we used to visit family every Christmas in Mexico, so I'd get a little bit of Spanish there. But my dad was very firm about trying to be as American as possible, which is, I totally understand being a first generation person moving to a primarily white neighborhood and things like that. He would kind of, he always made this joke that in high school he would tell people he was Irish, and then it was "Oh, Segura" with like a little thing in there. So, but he really did that. So there's a lot of like shame, I guess, there, and it made it very interesting growing up because I feel so distant from it all, and I don't feel well connected. And I wish I did. I really tried in college to get more connected to it. I joined like a multicultural sorority that was uh, predominantly based with a lot of Latin American students, and I really was trying to latch onto that and relate. But it's been an interesting thing. But one thing that you brought up that is really interesting is the class status and the I guess the more conservative versus like liberal thinking and things like that. I do have to say it's been great having such a supportive family, whereas like my dad is like, he's always just been like a truck driver, and for him to be like, yeah, that's cool if you want to move to New York and be a musical theater person, that's awesome. And I just love that he's been so supportive about that, because that's not a world he understands at all. And being the first in my family to go to college, and he only went to high school and then has just driven trucks ever since. So like we almost speak totally different languages in that sense, because he has no idea what I'm doing in New York. I try to explain theater to him and he's like, I don't get it. But it's great that he's so supportive, even though it's not something that he's familiar with. But yeah.
Well, shout out to you, Vicky, because I feel like you sort of like struck a chord with, I don't know, me, certainly, maybe many in this room, and perhaps those listening right now who come from second or third generation parents. My grandparents on my father's side fled Cuba in 1947 from after the Batista Revolution. My grandfather was a doctor. He was very wealthy. And so leaving Cuba, and I know, Juliana, you're Cuban as well, perhaps you're nodding, but leaving Cuba at that time in the late 40s and early 50s was a really a big situation. They wanted to protect their wealth, and they escaped an authoritarian dictator, essentially. And there was this strong need to assimilate into American culture and American identity. And Vicky, you spoke of this as well, the never speaking Spanish, the sort of like trying to almost hide it. Unlike your last name, for me and my family, we couldn't hide it because my actual last name and our family last name is Castro. And so it was, so it was quite difficult to sort of like escape that. So my real name is actually Christian Castro. As a professional, I've been using Perry for a variety of reasons, which perhaps we'll get into a little later when we talk about professional, our identities when it comes to our professions. But for right now, I'll focus on that theme really resonated with me regarding the desire to assimilate and the shame involved as well. And so, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Actually, Vicky, great story, by the way. It kind of like reminded me, especially with your dad, wondering what musical theater is all about. I'm second generation as well. My mom is Bolivian, my dad's Ecuadorian. So growing up in the performing arts was not, how can I say, supportive when it came to them. I'm glad that you had someone to support you. I'm sure that a lot of maybe second, maybe third generation, probably maybe had that little bit of a stigma with maybe some of their first generation parents. I know I did, but I'm also an older generation as well. I'm 43, so I'm a 70s baby, you can say. But I remember getting into theater. I remember I took dance classes as well. I took musical theater classes as well. And I remember explaining this to my mom and explaining this more importantly to my dad. Like, oh, that's great. I'm glad that you're having fun, but let's get a little bit more focused. Let's see what we can do. Granted, they always want the best for us. Parents always want the best for us, especially first generational parents. If they came here, one of the things that they always try to implement us is always, we want the best for you. I think with the stigma as well, I grew up the same way. I remember being a little kid, I used to speak Spanish, and that was my first language. And then going into kindergarten, having to learn English. I had an older sister, and my mom would literally tell us, my sister and myself, speak in English, speak in English. I want you guys to learn English. So it's funny. No, I wouldn't say funny, but it's just, it's nice to see that a lot of people have also grown up. Some of people might have grown up with these quote unquote struggles, but at least there's similarities to it, and also different perspectives. I'm happy, Vicky, that you actually had a very supportive father, especially when it comes to your theater career. Most of us had to struggle with that, but at the same time, it's like, it's good to see the differences.
Richard, I would never have thought you were 43, like ever in my life. I thought you were like my age.
Oh, thanks for that.
Hey y'all, I'm Wo. I am a third generation Latinx person. So my abuelita came over to the US, to LA, from Jimenez, Mexico, and Juarez. And then she had my mom, so she was a second generation. She ended up in Houston, and that's where I was born. So I'm a third generation. And it's really interesting for me, because like I didn't learn Spanish until actually high school, when I like got into Spanish class. And I don't, it sounds weird to other people, but like I kind of learned through like the formal stuff much better than like trying to pick it up from like my abuelita or like my mom. When they would talk around the house, I wouldn't really get it. And I'd be like, what is that? I don't get it. And I was just like very comfortable with English. And so I didn't want to like get out of my comfort zone when I was a kid and learn it. But then once I got into high school, I started learning it, and I was like, oh, I like this. So I like, looking back, I actually grew up with like a lot of other Latinx people around me. Like my neighbors back door, they were like second generation Mexicans. Their mom had come over and married their dad, who was like an American citizen. So I grew up around them a lot, and like their family as well. But then like in middle school, we moved away from like that neighborhood to like a different neighborhood. So like they were both suburban neighborhoods, but I think that was like this instance where it was kind of that class thing of like, we're moving to this new neighborhood, and like the new neighborhood, like I still don't really know anyone there, but it was a lot less like diverse for me. So that's when I think I started to like gear towards those like self-expression instincts that you were talking about, Alex, where it was like, okay, I need to learn Spanish. I need to like actually become like a true Mexican, because like I felt like disconnected from it for a long time. And like even with my name, my stage name is Wo, and that comes from my like personal name, which is Wayne Babineau. So like that, my name like kind of tells you about my dad's side of the family, which is like Louisiana Creole, but it doesn't tell you that I'm half Mexican. So it's been kind of this thing where like, if I want to tell people about it, then I can, but it's like not, on the page right there. But I think like as I've gotten older, I've been able to like reach back and like reclaim stuff. I went on a heritage trip in 2019 with my abuelita to her hometown, Jimenez, because she was like always telling me about it when I was growing up. So I went over there and like experienced it, and it was just really beautiful and very different from like resort Mexico, which I had been to before with my mom. And I met just like a bunch of like tios and tias and like primos and all these people, and they're just all just so supportive, and I love it.
So, hi everyone, I'm Erica. So I am a second generation Latinx person. My parents immigrated to the US from Colombia in 1985. So it's interesting hearing everyone talk about their experiences with their parents navigating, you know, their identities in their home country, or I don't know if that's the right term to use, but and versus trying to assimilate into American culture. It's just, I feel like it's such a delicate balance. I can look at my parents' behavior and the way they raised me and see that there are elements that they held on to their culture. They raised us speaking Spanish. They took us to Colombia. They made sure to incorporate the food, the music. They really tried to hold on to it. But then I see other parts where they did have that aspect of like trying to assimilate. And I sometimes examine that and I look at like, what did they try to assimilate into and why, you know? And I've always felt like I'm not fully like American enough and like I'm not fully Colombian enough, because there's always been this duality in where I grew up and how I was raised. That's like kind of a little bit of both. And I think it's great. And I think that, you know, it's interesting like that, Alex, you started talking about class in this discussion, because I do think that in the US, it is a position of privilege to an extent to be able to, you know, express your culture and not fear, you know, any like, I mean, I grew up in Miami, so I think that definitely played a part where Latinx cultures is really normalized and it's everywhere, and there's a large Cuban presence. But it's interesting because we do have a German last name due to my father's great grandfather, and we are white. So I don't know. I just think that I can't really separate like culture from like race from class, because I feel like it's interesting how the US, like you grow up here and it seems like it's a post-racial society, and that was kind of the false idea I grew up with, but it's really not. And as I've gotten older, I've just appreciated my parents' background so much more, and really trying to understand like what it means to express yourself in the US in a way that's truly yours, and to resist the urge to like be boxed into like a certain stereotype or to fully assimilate, you know. And it sometimes in the US it feels like you need to be either one or the other, or like from my Colombian extended family, I'm like, do I need to morph into a different person? And anyways, I don't want to ramble, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the moderator, so I tried to make my feelings about this as like objective as possible. But like, I think in reading about like, and then Jasmine's going after me. Sorry, I forgot to say that. But I think in reading about how like the whole thing about class in this research and in everything that we've been doing with Quemoción, where what we're sort of discovering is that there is what you were saying, Erica. It's so weird calling you Erica because I just call you Gertz all the time, but Erica, like how there is this want or this expectation to just be like one thing. And I think that that is something that so many Latinx people can relate to, is like, I'm not just one thing. I'm not. And I think that that's something that I've had a whole journey with, particularly in the arts and in wanting to be an artist, because our parents came from a place still is very much so divided by class. There is a caste system in the parts of Barranquilla and, the coastal parts of Colombia that exist and that are still there. And when they came here, it was like they were actually kind of mavericks, and that they encouraged us to speak Spanish, and Spanish was our first language forever, for everything. We weren't allowed to speak English in the house. And in the meantime, like my mom had a cousin, and I think my dad's brother also encouraged his kids to speak English primarily in order to assimilate more seamlessly. And my parents went in the opposite direction. But like, yeah, just in doing this and in conducting the research for this, my mind just goes in like so many different like directions of just like, if it's supposed to, not really matter, if class isn't really supposed to matter, or where you come from isn't supposed to matter, then how come it matters like so much? And it seems to really matter. There just seems to be this like expectation to be a certain thing, because growing up in Miami was like, Cuban influence, Colombian influence, Haitian, just a lot of different cultures, especially when we moved even further down south to Miami, because we were in the suburbs before. And then I remember moving to New York, and that was when it was like, whenever people found out I was Latina, it would be like this, like, oh my God, that's so like exotic. And it's like, but it's not really, like, and I remember feeling that way. I remember feeling when I was in my early 20s being like, oh yeah, like this is what makes me interesting. You know what I mean? And like, especially in the entertainment industry, I've often felt like, well, if I want to be a proud Latina, which I am, then I have to go the Sofia Vergara route. Like I have to thicken. I can't speak so American. I can't speak so white. Maybe I should darken my hair. Maybe I should darken my skin a little bit. Maybe I should wear a certain kind of makeup or jewelry. And then people will be like, oh, she's Latina, when it's like, I absolutely am through and through. And then this whole thing about speaking Spanish, of like, whether you speak Spanish or not, does that make you more or less, if you're able to communicate with your grandma, then does that make you a better Latin person? Like, and I feel like as Latin American people, we struggle with that. I do. I really think that we as a group are always trying to define who we are. We're always trying to come up with the parameters and the rules and in order to like push back on the expectations. But then it's like, how much can we like define ourselves within the system if the system still exists? I guess that's something that I'm grappling with a lot lately. And it seems to kind of be a no-win situation, not to be negative, but like it doesn't seem easy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jasmine. So I hope that you'll all forgive me a little bit, because I think technically, according to Pew, I'm an interloper here. I'm like third generation as what I would call myself on my father's side, but we're Puerto Rican on that side. And I kind of don't agree with lumping Puerto Rican in with like the same description of first, second, and third generation in regards to American mainland culture, which was very interesting that they had that all as the same thing. I think that, there's still the same issues of not everyone can come over, the amount of cost associated, like the barriers of entry involved, not to mention the othering in once you get here. Like, I think it's kind of still the same thing. And then on my mother's side, I'm second generation, and I'm only half Puerto Rican, half Filipino. And so I don't speak Spanish. My family spoke English in the house, that's it. I don't even know that there was necessarily so much focus on assimilation as much as it just is, it's just what the options were. Grew up in a very white town, in a pretty white place. And Yeah, what struck me of all of the things that you were reading off from the Pew Research, though, was the heavy association of the class base and the single parent household. Because I'm constantly thinking about both sides. I'm constantly thinking about like what it is to be Asian American and what it is to be Latina American. And I'm constantly trying to like put those two things together. And for me, I was wondering, you know, the Black and Latina community are constantly dealing with higher incarceration rates and what that means for single mothers. And the fact that the incarceration rates are not as high in the Asian community. And so does that mean that that's another part of that's another part of what's the word, the just being the race that seems to quote unquote assimilate more easily, just like these different factors and facets of minorities in America. Anyway, that was the one thing that really struck me, and how that is very troubling.
Hi, hello everybody. I just like wanted to say, just hearing all of that really just like struck a chord in my heart, because we're juggling so many identities, you know, and I feel like as we're trying to juggle and assimilate, I don't know, it just really like it hit me kind of emotionally. But I'm second generation. I'm Puerto Rican Dominican. My father came from the island, and I say my dad he's always still been with the island. He never really wanted to assimilate at all, whereas my mother really wanted us to assimilate. So that was always an interesting facet. I mean, I grew up with my dad calling me white because I really wanted so badly to assimilate with American culture. And I grew up in Florida as well, but I was mainly in sort of like white Florida, you know, and that was a different experience. But just sort of being there, in seeing how my dad would look at me and be like, "You don't speak Spanish." I never learned Spanish, never wanted to. I was very resistant to it. And just hearing everyone's responses, it makes me think like this is the education system's fault in a way. You know, the education system sort of says like, hey, if you want to be successful, you got to assimilate to American history, assimilate to English. All of this stuff is going to equal success. So, I mean, I grew up with my grandfather he always used to say he was an architect in PR. And when he came here, he was like working, like doing jobs. I think it was like working at a bakery at one point. But he's always talking about how he couldn't do anything really special because he didn't have American education. They wouldn't let him. They wouldn't give him that chance. So that was something that was really instilled in me. It was like, you got to do really good in school, otherwise you're screwed. You know. So I think while you're trying to stay with your culture, the education system's like, nah, you gotta get away from this because you need to be successful. And it's something that I observed like in a podcast episode a while back, where they kind of did this with the Germans and Italians and Swedes and all this stuff, where they were like, you cannot speak Italian around me. And then you had a generation of like Italians not being able to speak Italian to their grandparents. So I never got to speak Spanish to my grandparents. And I think it's just interesting how we're trying so hard to hold on to it, but this American dream is trying to take us away at the same time. It's a weird contradiction that I'm hearing from everyone and that I've been observing myself. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's sort of like in insert name, I was, now in America, I am. Like that really resonates with me, Stephen. I grew up deep in the Midwest where there were 5 other Cubans. And there were like 2 that were like related to Batista's doctor. And then there was like others. And so I grew up with my very, very Cuban mom, where I learned that being American is not actually about like what your skin looks like. It's about how you handle your anger. That's what being American means to me. And in the Midwest, you don't deal with your anger. And so I have these memories of like going out to get like Christmas tree ornaments with my mother. And there's like a small discrepancy and she's flying off the handle. And so I feel like what I learned about like how to be the like good second generation that I am was like fluency and mediation of like this translation of like, okay, mom, I'm hearing that you feel like the tax is too high and you think it might be racist. Hello, person, white person. It sounds like you might have made a mistake. That's fine. Let's translate this. And so I feel like when I was confronted with my peers at school, who I would say, my name is Juliana. It looks like a J, but it sounds like an H. That automatically like put me in this category of non-American, even though I was fluent in, you know, I got my emotions. I'm playing them close to the vest, and I'm not going to let you see how like what I'm really thinking, because I know that I have to like perform in order to like be part of this group. And that really messed with me. And it wasn't until I realized that my mom had this talent where she could find Cubans anywhere. Like truly, I think I think Cubans are like really good at sniffing out other Cubans, and like Latinos are really good at sniffing out others, because like I met a bus driver. I'm inviting them over for dinner. They're Cuban. I met a priest. And so I feel like the way I learned to be Cuban was listening to stories at a table. And so the first like relationship I had outside of shame, which is like, oh my God, my mom is so other, was wow, like I had to imagine what the island was like. And hearing you all talk about like going back and like whether or not we speak Spanish in the home really it does something for me, because it's like I didn't go back. I didn't go there until 2018 was the first time I went. And my grandma was like, why are you going back? Like, why would you do that? And I was like, I have to know like what this thing is that I'm holding. And then I got there, and they were like, "Oh, you're Yuma. You're Americana. Like you do not fit in either place." And so I feel like that as artists, right? Like some part of why we're artists and why we're interpreters is that we're like sort of constantly doing this synthesizing of the like our imagined utopia, or like the multiple identities. Someone used juggling, which is like so beautiful, that we're like trying to make the spaces where these multiplicities can exist. And that just like really warms my heart. So Jasmine, I hear you that it's like depressing, but like moments like this where I'm seeing so many things that I'm like, ooh, I'm over here like, ooh, that's me. Ooh, that's me. But it's like not, it's y'all, and we're here. End of soapbox.
Juliana, you are singing my life. Yes, this is why we're artists. Yes, because we're mediating. We're bringing together all these different things and creating a space of possibility where we can exist. And that's just everything to me. And before that, I was going to say, I feel like there's this idea that kids can't learn more than one language at a time. And it's kind of ridiculous. And I feel like it's only really like a US idea, because everywhere else around the world, kids and people learn to speak multiple languages. But for some reason, there's this idea that like, oh, if you're raising them speaking Spanish, then like they won't be as good at English or something. And so it's just like this value structure, again, like with the education system of like, well, we definitely want them to excel in English, so we're not going to like expose them to Spanish to like not, mess them up or anything. And I think that was like kind of some of the logic behind like why I didn't learn until later in an academic setting. And then, yeah, I had something else, but I'm not remembering. I'm just grateful to be here with y'all.
Well, Juliana, you mentioned when your grandmother asked you, why would you want to go back? That really spoke to me as well, because I want to go to Cuba very badly. I haven't been, but, and I grew up in South Florida, like a few of us here, and the temperature around Fidel Castro is pretty hostile here. So this is a very sort of the Cuban community down here. I'm in Miami now, actually. The Cuban community down here is pretty right-wing, anti-big government, and they have gone to the extreme with it. And so this concept of identity has affected me, not just culturally, but politically and economically as well. My worldview toward politics has been affected. I grew up with Fidel is bad, big government is bad. You know, the takeover of authoritarian dictatorship is horrible. And when I went to New York and I met Cubans who maybe didn't share that sentiment because they had a sort of different experience that brought them to America, and the more I sort of learned about economics and politics, and while of course there have been massive human rights transgressions and like terrible things that have occurred, I actually don't fear that sort of thing. Like I voted for Bernie Sanders. Don't tell my Cuban family. But you know, like at the end of the day, it has actually sort of affected that in some way. And so it is very interesting to think about where we are politically and economically today, and how and this isn't true in just Cuba, obviously in many Latin American countries, there are these nationalist movements happening. Well, actually, this is sort of global, not just unique to Latin America, but these movements are sort of informing people's politics, and class does play such a big role in these identities too. And it's like shifting. Me being third generation, it's like a big deal if they find out I voted for Bernie, you know? So yeah, I just wanted to share the political and economic element to the conversation.
So I have a couple things like floating in my head. This is like also thought-provoking. So I'm gonna try to like, it's the end of a long day, I'm trying to like organize, but I love, Juliana, your point about how what made you feel kind of different, or what made your family feel different, was how you expressed anger. And that set such a like light bulb moment for me, because you know, throughout this conversation we've been referring to like speaking Spanish, and that's like obviously it's like an easy way to identify if you come from someplace else, is like if you speak the language. But I really identify with that emotional aspect, and I feel like we need, I don't know, like in the broader conversations about culture in the US, I don't know if it's the US or if it's the assimilation or what it is, but it's like we don't talk about that enough. And I just love that you brought that into the conversation, because like I relate to that so much. Like even though I didn't grow up, you know, being the best Spanish speaker, I still felt a little different from my friends who were just, you know, have their families have been in the US for generations, just with how I express myself. And my family is very expressive and emotional, and anger is for sure like a powerful, you know, tool in making a point and like whatever, weaponizing emotion and what have you. But anyways, I want to like touch on the American dream question, and kind of Christian, what you were saying too. Like I think so the US and Latin America were colonized, but then they took different paths. So they're very different, but then there are still some parallels. Like Christian, you mentioned that class and race kind of shape your political views, and the backgrounds that your family had in the country they came from, like will influence their attitudes in the US. And I definitely saw that with my family as well. And I think like the American dream definitely is real. Like for me, I mean, for me, I think like, I don't know, you see so many success stories, and if you compare the US to other countries, like, yeah, there are more opportunities, but then I still think that there are like these like extensions of colonization still going on, where it's like, if your family's like mine and you come from a line of colonizers, then you're going to have an easier time like coming to the US. So like, yeah, there are roadblocks. My parents did go through a lot, but did they go through as much as somebody like, I don't know, who has a darker skin tone or who crossed on foot or what have you, like, and yeah, though then like you wind up being brought up with these like isolationist views because like my parents grew up in like a country club environment in Colombia where it was very sink or swim because there was no middle class. And now I see those same structures kind of happening in the US where the middle class is disappearing and all these rich white people are like, oh my God, like clutching their pearls, you know? And so, yeah, that I love this conversation. Like, you guys have like brought up so many thoughts for me, so I'll pass it off.
I think something I was thinking about before was like, totally correct me if I'm wrong, but I also just feel, and I felt it also when I was in high school and when I was going to school with Cubans, and then when I was also getting to know the Puerto Rican community a bit in New York, and now living in Washington Heights as well. Like it varies region to region, and getting to Dominicans, like just an element of like, you know, not a hesitation to, I guess, acknowledge our shared experiences, particularly in like, I just spoke to this artist, visual artist. His name is Manny Vega, and he's amazing. And I cry every time I talk to him because he says like amazing, profound things. But he said that the way he's from Puerto Rico, but he's been all around the world. And he said this thing of like, I am diaspora. And so are all Latin Americans. And it's like, that really hit me. Yeah. And that really hit me. And I was like, holy shit. Like that's what my people are. Like, that's like, we have a lot in common. Like Puerto Rico was also colonized by Spain. And it's not just our colonization that we have in common, but it's like the fact that we do come from other places. I think there's also just a hesitation because I think Cubans, it's a different story, and probably Venezuela. It's like if you were trying to escape an oppressive guy, but then Colombians, we also had FARC and we had Escobar. And so like, it's like we all were trying to come here for like a better life. But there's this hesitation to talk about that, I guess. I don't know if it's because we don't want to, or maybe, older generations don't want to come off as like weak or vulnerable or victims or anything like that. But I do feel like that would unite us more than like drive us apart of just like, we are all others, like we are all different, and it hasn't been easy for anyone. And instead I feel like there's more of this like competition. Like, I don't know if anyone knows it, but there's kind of this element of that. And, just going off of what Erica was saying, like, it's just like, I think also an element of like keeping, and also something that Rich said a little bit, of keeping up appearances of like, my being a waitress is a controversial topic. Like, I can't really talk to my aunts and uncles about that, because that's just like, don't talk about that. Talk about your producing, talk about your writing, talk about the roles you're booking or getting a callback for. You don't have to talk about your day job. And I was just like, but I spend a lot of time at that day job too. Like, that's a big part of my life, but like, just don't lead with that, or just don't even talk about it. I sense that a lot too. So yeah, there's a constant negotiation of self, I feel, at all times.
I mean, well said. I mean, there is always a constant negotiation of self. I mean, one of the struggles being second generation and also being bilingual. Again, I grew up with Spanish being my first language and having to learn English. My parents always pushed English, we want the best for you. But then with that, they're looking out for the best of you. You at that time being a kid also have to kind of look out for the best of them, because all of a sudden you get a phone call and you get someone who's speaking English and your parents do not understand. And here you are, maybe 7, 8, 10-year-old, whatever, talking to an adult, trying to understand what they're saying, the concept of what they're saying, and then trying to translate it to your parents so they can understand. And not only that, their response, vice versa. That's a lot of pressure to put on a child growing up. And also to piggyback, I think Wo said it too, you know, the stigma that kids can learn 2 languages. They can learn 2 languages. It's bilingual people, for crying out loud. I think there was a joke out there that said I think it was Sofia Vergara. She said, I think it was in Modern Family, where it's like, you know, I wish I can speak English the way I speak Spanish, because I could express my anger so much better and so much clearer, which is completely true. Because you have to, the same words, all the English words, you have to know in the Spanish words. Also have to know the proper function for them, the male and the female versions of it as well too. There's so many rules. And also then let's not even get into the American language. There, two. I mean, there's a lot of confusion going on, but to put that pressure onto a kid, again, your parents at that time were looking for the best for you, but at that time as well, you have enough pressure that you always have to look for the best in your parents. So people who are struggling with that sort of identity where your parents are pushing you, learn English, but at the same time want to hold on because here comes your mom, here comes your dad, your abuelita, you know, and then all of a sudden you get that phone call, you get that doorbell ring, you know, you get that one thing, it's like, can you help me translate? So that's something I kind of wanted to put out there, especially since it was mentioned that kids cannot learn 2 languages. Kids can learn languages. Kids can learn languages, more than 2. So, and I digress.
Okay, so yeah, it was in response to Juli's thing about like how her mom expresses anger. I was thinking about how like it feels like it's all Mexicans, but it could just be like my family in particular. But I feel like it's how we express love that's like so different than like American culture. I just feel like there's like a tenderness, like a warmth, and like the way that we talk to each other, and like in the way that you can use Spanish that I feel is not like always there in like American culture or in English. And it's actually funny because it's like a dynamic that happens in my family where like people on my dad's side were Black, and I feel like they more value like, you know, being like your own independent like agent kind of person, you know. And so like a lot of times they'll just be like, oh, why are y'all like hugging on each other so much? Or like, why are you like, just like, why are you saying I love you so much? Or just doing this thing? And I'm like, that's just us. Like, that's just how we do it. So I don't know, but it's something that I really like cherish. And I think like those really like tender spots underneath like all this cultural presentation of like language and like appearance and stuff like those things are what actually matter to people.
Well, guys, this has been great. This has been very cathartic. I guess we'll go around. We'll do final, cathartic's not the right word, but we'll go around. We'll do final comments. And yeah, it's just been a pleasure talking about all of this with you guys.
I'll jump in. Two things really quick. I realized that I forgot how to do the raise your hand thing because I've been teaching on Google Classroom lately. And so I was like, wait, how do I do this? So just really, really quick, I know it's closing, but I just really, like, it struck a chord with me when Alex was talking about navigating the entertainment industry with your cultural background. Because for me, it was really interesting going to an art school and having them be like, great, you're Latin. Here's a bunch of Spanish songs. Here's Christina Aguilera. Hey, dye your hair darker, you know, the whole shebang. Do an accent. And like, kind of traumatizing. And like, I'm just like, but I'm me. And I just want to be me. And I'll go to the audition. And if they feel like I'm what they want, that's cool. But I'm not gonna fake something or put anything on just to make people happy or make them feel like it's what they understand my cultural background to be, because they're not me. So I just really, really related to that. And like, that's such a big discussion right now in the industry, especially in telling your stories and the stories that you relate to. And that's different across the board. That doesn't matter what country you came from or what country your parents came from. Your relation to that story is your own. So that's just a really big thing for me. And I'm like, have a lot of feelings about that. But I did want to say that this has been really great. I started the conversation saying how this kind of stuff makes me uncomfortable because I feel so distant from my culture and my heritage. And it was so great to hear from other people that had similar experiences growing up and similar thoughts and struggles within themselves. And yeah, I normally feel so isolated, and this has just been really, really, really great. So thank you, everyone.
Like Vicky, what you just said made me think of how the US culture, and I won't talk too long, but like US culture does a great job of commodifying the other. And it's like, okay, you speak Spanish, you have the dark skin and the dark hair, and that's all what being Latinx is. But like, hopefully by doing things like this, and hopefully by bringing it into the public sphere of the US, we can like change that language and be like, no, it's so much more than that. It's like how you express emotion, it's how you were raised, it's like all these other nuanced things. So yeah, I feel that, and this has been great.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have everyone, here today and to speak with all of you about all of this and hear your experiences. And yeah, I guess my last little thing would be that sometimes I feel like our own communities are the most stringent gatekeepers. And I'm just like so happy to hear that there's more and more people who are not willing to participate in it.
Well, basically, what I've learned is that a lot of us, we have very different backgrounds. And we also live in the United States. Our identities are all over the place. And that's okay. I'd rather just grab the best of every part of the world and just make it my own. Be unique. Make it your own. Mix a little bit of whatever you want to mix it in, and then come up with something new. That's basically how I feel that you won't necessarily find whatever answers you're looking for, but at least you'll find that balance and develop into something that you might unexpectedly found that you weren't looking for. But once again, I digress.
Yeah, I think like hopping in off that point of like this invitation to make things our own. I also kept hearing a lot about like the idea of like we have to be pitted against each other, and something I'm leaving this conversation with is that like there is space for many, and like there is never going to be like the Latino, the Latina, the Latinx person, like that we get to by who we are, by the work that we do, by the people that we hire, by the people that we collaborate with. We are actually like getting to make that umbrella bigger, and that's like really exciting to me. So thank you all for that.
Yeah, on top of what everyone has already said, as we enter the sort of second quarter of the 21st century, we are, I think, being asked to like really consider what the whole concept of identity, just like we're moving forward so fast and everybody is so many things, and not just culturally, ethnically, with gender, sexuality. We are like entering this like multi-faceted, beautiful tapestry, and that is true for every individual. So this conversation is right on target for today, but I don't think that it will be in 20 years in a good way. Not that Cafecito can't go on for 20 years, but it'll have to evolve. But
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, I super appreciate hearing all this, because I mean, to encapsulate what everyone is saying is that we are not a monolith. We are not just one thing. You can't look at me and say, oh, okay, this is what you are. This is the Latin community. No, we are clearly the example of those breaking the generational curses that were set, for us. And I just super, super, super appreciated hearing all these different experiences that kind of broke the molds of what people expect of us. So yeah.
Great. Beautifully said. Such a great time to hang out with you guys for an hour. Thank you all so much for taking time to do this. And I hope you get plenty of sleep. I hope you have a nice meal. And we'll talk later. Thank you again. Take care. Bye. Oh, right. We got to cheers. Sorry. We got to cheers. Don't leave. Don't leave. Get your mugs and cheers. All right. 1, 2, 3. Cheers. Cafecito.